Hello, friends, and welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast, where we focus on optimizing the well-being and best practices of insurance and financial professionals today. On this show, our objective is to help you optimize your life, optimize your profession, and learn from other optimized advisors. I'm your host, Scott Heinila. We hope you enjoy the show. Hello, listeners. This is a super fun and eventful, really eventful podcast that we're going to be putting on today with Jake Ireland from Off Hours Bourbon. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone.
This is pretty darn cool. We get to drink bourbon in our own podcast studio. That's fun. Guys, you want to say hi?
Hello.
Who are you?
The Nick Bernatowicz.
There you go. Welcome, Nick Bernatowicz, for those of you who know him. Life LTC annuity sales consultant extraordinaire for Producer's Choice.
Dad and avid golfer. You got to add that in there.
That's right. Father of one beautiful princess.
Indeed.
And last but not least, introduce
Ryan
yourself.
Letchford here.
Ryan Letchford, also annuity guru. So as you know, Jake, we at Optimize Advisor is really a podcast that focuses on, our client base is really financial advisors, wealth managers. I would say individuals who, from time to time like to tip a little back here and there.
Don't we all?
Yeah, absolutely. So playing on the word optimize, right? Learning on, we really hit three main categories, just to give you a little insight. One is kind of optimizing your life. So this is the funnest, broadest category of the podcast. And this, in my opinion, falls right into that. Learning how to be more optimized with consuming bourbon or finer spirits.
100%.
So we hope that you're going to be able to enlighten us today in that capacity.
I'll do my best.
But also learning from other optimized advisors. So the traditional sense of that would be financial advisors, wealth managers, who we feel fit the mold of operating at the highest level, living and learning by their example. But any successful or entrepreneur or business owner that is working hard to build a business and build a brand, in my opinion, is an optimized advisor. So you're hitting more than one mark today, my friend.
All right.
Seriously, thank you for coming in to spend a little time with us.
Of
Teach
course.
us knuckleheads about bourbon and being better at consuming bourbon, and learning more about whiskey and bourbon and like thereof. Before we get into today's topic, let me kind of do you the proper intro. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that too next.
Sure.
So Jake Ireland grew up in Indiana, close by to the distillery that Off Hours currently sources barrels from. Definitely want to learn about how that happened. Went to Indiana University and started his career in healthcare, and then moved into venture capital investments. During his time spent in this field, Jake was able to invest in and become an owner in a bourbon brand, where he learned a host of lessons on both what works and what to avoid in order to break through in the hyper-competitive spirits industry. Jake founded Off Hours after years of perfecting the product and launched the brand in 2020. Holy cow.
What a year.
What did you say before we got online, Nick, about someone starting a business?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine starting a business in 2020. All the challenges that year brought, let alone starting a business. I started a business in 2009 with its own challenges, but 2020 is unprecedented.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I had a lot of people tell me I was crazy, and they're like, what are you doing? Like, you're going to pick the worst year and how long to try to get a company off the ground. And but a lot of people also told me too, they're like, it's just crazy enough to I think it's going to work. So it sort of it really kind of opened our eyes to really what our strategy was going into this year. We were thinking of launching earlier in 2020 in the spring, around this time last year. And when everything went on lockdown, it was sort of like, okay, well now we're sort of forced to be at home, and I definitely don't want to do it now, just not knowing what the future was going to be like. So we sort of took a step back and really started to hone in on what our strategy was going into what was going to be a normal year, we thought, and really started to make some of the moves that we thought would put us in a pretty good position, regardless of where things stood at the time. So actually we ended up sort of taking 5-6 months or so to really kind of get our ducks in a row. And we decided that there wasn't really any light at the end of the tunnel, I felt like. So it was kind of like, well, we're just sort of sitting here like, when is this going to go? And we just said, okay, well, we're going to make this our launch date, and we're just going to go with it, and we're gonna see what happens. And we launched middle of September 2020, and a lot of times brands don't launch around that time either, because October, November, and December in the alcohol industry are crazy. All restaurants, liquor stores, your customer is buying up for the holidays, and it's just sort of, when it comes to the distributors, they've got their hands full with all the brands that are already part of their portfolio. So they're never really looking to take on a new brand, which is hard enough already. But it was weird timing, weird year, and sort of, we ended up having a lot of success out of the gate, which sort of opened, everyone's eyes to like, wow, this can be done, and they're taking a little bit of different approach than what we've seen in the alcohol industry. And so far so good. So it's nice that we've kind of gotten through what I would think is hopefully the most difficult period, in the last few months. And now we see that, with places opening back up and indoor dining, being available, and I think customers and, people are ready to be out and about. And, I think that, hopefully they're ready to drink some bourbon. And
I mean, the good news with everybody being locked in their house, right? They were all just getting drunk every day. What
at least
was
initially,
for?
Initially,
Yeah.
everybody was.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many Zoom meetings. It's like, 11 a.m. and you hear, it's like,
seriously.
you gonna have a drink with me? I'm like, I don't know. I've got kids running around. Like, this is
in March, like 2 weeks into March, what was normally happy hour at, let's say, 5:30 turned into 4:30 to 3:30.
Yeah.
And then the 12:30.
Agreed.
And that was that's a silver lining for your business.
100%. Yeah. So it's been interesting, and I think you mentioned the whole at-home cocktail scene. That was something that prior to COVID, everybody was out and about, and they were expecting to go to a bar and have a cocktail made for them, and I think everybody being at home, and if they weren't running around chasing their kids or busy with work, and they wanted a drink, it was like, well, it's it's on me to figure that out. So we sort of pivoted from, hey, we're going to focus on bars and restaurants, to how do you make that home cocktail scene? So how do you make sure that the cocktails that we were putting out there were simple and easy to make, accessible products, like where there's a few ingredients that you're going to have hopefully at your house already, or are easy to pick up at the grocery store, versus running all over town to find off the wall liqueurs and different things that no one's ever going to have in their bar. So it sort of was like, okay, well, let's make sure that we keep it simple, we keep it convenient, and then we really start pushing the delivery aspect and sort of the online sales and the things that were a very small piece of the puzzle before, as far as everybody was, I'll walk into the liquor store and I'll grab a bottle and I'll come home and that's it. And it's like, now, well, I don't know if I should be out and about, or what's going on, and it's like, well, they can deliver to me, so that's great. So it's sort of again, I think helped the alcohol industry as a whole to modernize a bit, which the whole purpose of this bourbon was to create a more modern bourbon, a more modern approach to it, and kind of try to get away from some of the sort of stuffy stereotypes and the traditional heritage plays that have been done over and over and over again, and try to do something that's a little bit more up to date with all of our lifestyles.
So let's back that up to the beginning. How does an Indiana boy with healthcare and venture capital background decide and get into, I'm going to establish and found Off Hours Bourbon?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town called Lawrenceburg, Indiana. It's like southeast Indiana, just about half an hour, 45 minutes west of Cincinnati, Ohio. The distillery was, it's now called MGP, so Midwest Grain Products, and previously owned by Seagram's. So, it'd been owned for about 100 years or so by them. And then, over the last handful of years, there was a couple different PE shops and stuff that had bought and sold it. And, growing up there, had a lot of family and friends and, relatives and stuff that work there. And so I was always kind of around it. And, you drive through town and you could smell like the grains as they were, distilling everything. And it was cool. And like, when you went by, it was either like, what is that smell? And you're like, oh God, that's terrible. Or, or vice. And it was like, wow, you smelled like really sweet, the corn and the mash and everything going. I was like, wow, that kind of smells good. So yeah, I feel like you're either one side or the other. And, it was something, again, that I'd been around but never really thought a lot about getting, involved in it. And so I went to IU, ended up, I got into physical therapy. So I'd played sports all my life. I had a rotator cuff injury in my freshman year of college, and ended up, just getting involved in sort of the whole PT side of things, and was really, enjoying sports medicine. So I went on and got my doctorate in physical therapy out in Phoenix, and it was a 4-year undergrad, 3-year doctorate program, and had these goals or ambitions of creating this kind of one-stop shop for sports medicine. It was like, elite athletes from high school, college, pros, and, you're going to have your doctors and this and that, and everybody there. And, by the time I got done, I was just kind of like, I don't know, like the opportunity wasn't quite the same. And, you just kind of realize that, some of the glamour I thought of what it was going to be wasn't exactly the same. So, I still took the boards, licensed to practice here in California. I put my license on hold, and, was really kind of like, well, now what do I do? How do I use this background that I've, just spent the last 7 years working on? How do I apply that to, something different? And, I had a chance with my father-in-law's family office. Basically, it was like, hey, we do these larger deals and everything, but we also see a lot of like early stage companies, more venture-based investments, but we don't really focus on it at all. Like maybe you could, kind of learn the ropes and sort of use that as an opportunity to
there's a gap in our practice.
Exactly. And it was kind of like, well, I don't know the first thing about, this stuff and but really sat in on a ton of meetings and probably asked a lot of really dumb questions and, but
trial by fire.
Exactly. I got thrown in the mix really quickly and but it was great. It was a huge learning lesson. And, what ended up happening was one of the first investments we made was in a bourbon brand that some guys I knew from back in the Midwest were launching in honor of their dad, who had been heavily involved in the industry on the sales and marketing side for decades, and he had passed away. And he had created this brand back in the 80s, but never really saw it to fruition. He just didn't know what to do with it. So the two sons were like, let's bring this in honor of him. So we ended up investing in it, and I was able to kind of tap into the distillery in my hometown and help source barrels and kind of do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. And we ended up growing the brand, and after it was about 4 years, we decided that there was a lot of partners involved, and everybody was kind of like, what do we do with this now? And we had an opportunity to sell it off and all the inventory and everything too. So we sold it off. Everybody walked away happy, and I was kind of like, well, I felt like there was an opportunity there that we sort of missed on. And, if I could do it all over again, here's what I would do differently. So I sort of put it on the back burner for a little while, this idea, and, and kind of went back to the whole venture investing stuff for another couple of years. And it was like middle of 2018. I was like, well, I really think that there's still this opportunity here. And I do believe that there's a gap in the market for, a newer bourbon that's sort of going to go outside the box a little bit from what's been done before and, try to reach that kind of millennial demographic, which, if you look at the numbers, the biggest consumers of bourbon are, 25, 26 to, early 40s. But like the bourbon stereotypes are not matching up with that demographic, and it's cigars and dimly lit rooms and brown leather couches
50-plus-year-old
men,
businessmen in suits.
Exactly, and it's like that's not it. So everybody's like, why are you targeting this group? And it's like, well, actually, objectively, if you look at the numbers, this is the group that's consuming the most. So then it was sort of like, okay, how do I build this brand? That's going to be essentially for me. Like, if I want to drink it, like, how do I target myself as a millennial? And so, when it comes to the whole, sourcing of barrels and all that type of stuff, I went back to the same distillery. I was like, I would love to be able to work with you guys, still have family and friends that work there. And I was like, this is my sort of connection back to the Midwest now living, out here for the
And
last,
that's a distillery that's been in existence for
forever. And they, all kinds of brands sourced from these guys, and
Wow.
they're producing hundreds of thousands of barrels, if not millions of barrels, maybe a year. And every big brand that you've ever heard is probably sourced from them at some point in time. And it's just sort of this behind the scenes things that a lot of brands don't really want to make or be as transparent about, I guess, as far as like, oh, well, everybody wants to think that, well, we built the distillery and this is our thing. And in a lot of cases there are, but a lot of times for a startup brand, it's really expensive to be able to have to go out and do all that with real, like, no proof of whether it's going to work or not. So if you start the brand, you're able to source the barrels, you can kind of get that traction or that understanding of, what this is going to look like. And, in some cases you never have to create a distillery and do the whole thing, soup to nuts. In some cases, it just kind of depends on what your strategy is. If you want to go that route, and you can if you want to. But
So is that considered like a single origin, like where essentially it's their distillery, they're doing everything soup to nuts at that one location? That would be a single origin bourbon,
Correct,
or whiskey.
Yep, yeah. So they're doing everything. They will create different mash bills, so different recipes. So the mash bill for off hours is 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% barley. That's kind of their gold standard for their 21% rye is sort of their go-to. They've got, I think, a 30% or 36% rye. They do a 95% rye whiskey. They do vodkas and all the other stuff too. But they're sort of for an Indiana distillery. They're a lot of people are sourcing from them, and even the guys in Kentucky that are sort of the big guys there of kind of do the same thing here and there. But yeah, so really roundabout way of getting from small town Indiana to healthcare to VC to now starting this in the last.
Well, I'm always
few years.
fascinated by just the story of different businesses and how they're born, out of a passion and a space that you saw. I mean, you think about the barrier to entry of a bourbon whiskey business. Forget COVID for a minute,
Yeah.
It's just you really buck the trend there and paved a way here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how'd you get the name?
So the name was something that we probably went through 15 or 16 names at least, where, I wanted something that was like, felt relatable to people. And it was like, I didn't want to like sort of section off, men or women or, this race or ethnicity or this one or, demographic of, where do you live at in the United States or what's going on. I was like, what can be relatable and what does everybody, have, or, what is a positive feeling that everybody can come up with? So we went through all these names, and literally we'd put down a list, and then we'd go through the USPTO like trademark database, and we'd, search for, hours trying to figure out if there was anything in like the spirits, alcohol category at all that was the same or similar. And if we didn't find anything, then we'd send it to a trademark attorney. And you'd find out in a few days that there was, a dozen other things that, are along the same lines. And, with craft breweries, craft distillers, craft wineries, like it's impossible to find, names that haven't been taken. And, we finally, we landed on off hours, and it was kind of like, okay, off hours, like, all right, everybody has off hours, everybody has downtime. Yeah. They're all different. Like we all work different, work schedules, and we all choose to spend our off hours, differently. And, I was like, well, that works. And I think it's a positive feeling of, at the end of the day during, when your off hours start, you hopefully want to have a drink.
I'm ready for some now. I'm a little thirsty.
Yeah,
Can
let's
we
do it.
pour into this here?
100%.
Yeah, while we're pouring, with your...
Who's going to do the honor, by the way? You want me to?
Do it.
Go for it,
Do
yeah.
it, host.
So we start, we're going to do this neat. Okay.
Start neat. So, again, there's a lot of stereotypes, and for the most part, it's always based off of what somebody else has told you. So like there is no one single way that you have to drink bourbon. Like, a lot of times what I would do is if I'll try it neat. So that, that's the way the distiller had it. So you want to try it. If it's, a little too warm or, it just doesn't work for you, then thank you. Then maybe add, even a couple drops of water will completely change the taste and the smell and everything of a bourbon. You know, or if you're like, hey, you know, I don't like room temperature, I want it to be cooled off a little bit, throw an ice cube in there. And, you know, and then kind of the last thing with a cocktail, it's like, you know, you want to have a bourbon that, you know, you see these ones that are really high proof, you know, so their alcohol is, you know, 110, 150, 120. Like, to drink it neat like this, pretty warm. And, you know, but at that same point, like if you put it into a cocktail, you're going to get the flavors that come through of the bourbon. It's not going to be drowned out by, you know, whatever the other ingredients are in the recipe. So kind of why we chose 47.5 is sort of that middle ground where if you want to drink it neat, it's not overly, you know, spicy, and, you know, it's got enough taste for those sort of, you know, bourbon enthusiasts that are only going to drink, you know, cask strength type stuff. But also at the same time, it'll stand up in a cocktail where you're going to get those, you know, notes that come through. So it was kind of like, all right, well, if you choose to drink it however you want, and, you know, hopefully, you know, you're able to enjoy it with good company. So,
Well, cheers.
cheers.
Hey, cheers to starting a spirit company in the midst of a COVID, as well as a new baby.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You are,
Yes.
you are incredible.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It's drinkable, right?
It's very nice.
Thank you.
You know,
You know, to answer your question too about the, you know, aside from COVID, the barriers of this, it's like, you know, the bourbon industry as a whole is a little bit different than a lot of other spirits, whether it's vodka or tequila, and tequila in some instance where you're aging it, and, you know, but like really as bourbon, you can't do anything to it. Like you can't add any flavoring, you can't add any, you know, food coloring. It's really, once it's in the barrel, like it's weather. Like it's the, you know, that's why the Midwest, Kentucky and everything is really good for, you know, for bourbon. It's really hot and humid in the summer, and it's really cold in the winter, and those barrels constrict and you know, expand in the heat, so it takes on a lot of the flavor of the wood, you know, in the warehouses of where they're stacked up. Like you're gonna have different taste profiles, but you know, what kind of makes bourbon a little bit different is like you really have to sort of forecast out years ahead to understand, like, we don't want to run out of barrels, or we don't want to buy so many barrels that we're sitting on them, and, you know, you don't know what to do, and you don't want to buy barrels and then bottle everything, because then if the brand flops, like you don't really have anything. So, you know, a barrier to entry that is really difficult, and going back to the sourcing barrels aspect, is like, where can you find barrels? Like, how can you buy barrels that have already been produced, that are stored somewhere, that is good for one, and that's going to taste good, but is going to sort of jumpstart the process. You know, for me, in 2018, I bought barrels that were at about, you know, 2.5, almost 3 years old. So, you know, I sampled a bunch of different, you know, mash bills and kind of where they were at and everything, and you know, chose to go this route. And, you know, the upfront sort of, you know, capital need to buy those barrels is one thing. And really for me, I took it as like a separate investment. You know, honestly, like I chose, you know, bourbon barrels almost as like a commodity, where, you know, a newly filled bourbon barrel versus a barrel that's, you know, 6, 7, 8 years old is astronomically more expensive than, you know, the new fill. So for me at 2.5 years old, it wasn't crazy expensive, but like knowing that by the time I wanted to bottle it at, you know, 5 years old or later, those barrels have appreciated so much that as long as I'm just sitting there, and like, you know, the storage fees and insurance is not really a whole lot to it.
Right.
That's your safety net. That's your backstop. So
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Who'd
So
ever
it's,
thought-
I was reading an article once about kind of the history of spirits in this country, and it spoke exactly to that, of like, a lot of this is forecasting, and these big distillers, they had, in the last 30, 40 years, there was a big misstep. And the misstep was, I think we forecasted a bunch of vodka and gin, and everything started to switch towards bourbon and whiskey.
right.
And there was this just complete lack of supply.
100%. And that's why you'll see, you know, and now the distillers have kind of figured it out too, and you know, it's supply demand. But, you know, previously when we launched the first brand I was a part of, just oak wood was incredibly difficult to get. Like the housing market was booming. Whiskey was going, the cooperages that were in need of the staves to build the barrels, like they couldn't they couldn't get it fast enough. And then when you had, Jim Beam and Jack Daniels and the guys that, have been there for, decades, they were like, hey, we have first shot at all these barrels. So all the smaller brands were, everybody was fighting in the pricing of barrels went, shot through the roof. So for us to be able to get barrels just based off of, relationships and everything, when everybody else was paying, 2-3 times what they probably were worth, we were able to get them at a much lower cost, which again was like, okay, well, if we're getting these below market value already, like that's helping us. Like we know, and then knowing that it was only going to continue, and, no one really knows, I guess, how long this trend's going to last. But right now, everybody's thinking, for at least the foreseeable future, that it's not going anywhere and it's just continuing to grow. And like you said, like with the forecasting aspect of it is a whole nother sort of element of, of having this brand. And, like, again, we don't have our own distillery, but we have to forecast out the barrels that we do have and, what our next products are going to be and how this is going to work and how many markets you want to open up, knowing that the distributors are like, well, if things really take off, like, you better not run out of product. And so you always need to have that sort of, back end of it taken care of and knowing that you have more access to barrels. But at the same time, like, you might sit on barrels and, sales might be a little bit slower than, what you think during COVID potentially, and, for us, so now it's like, okay, well, now we have all these other barrels that, maybe we don't want to sit on these for too long. There's always another startup. There's always another brand for the most part, or barrel brokers for that matter too, that'll buy those barrels from you, and then you can turn around and reinvest those into younger
That's another
barrels.
business
So
unto its own. That's incredible.
you wouldn't believe how many times now I've seen, little funds being put together to basically go out and buy brand new barrels from, distilleries that are well known and plugging it in there and knowing that they're going to get, a fairly decent return in a few years because there's always going to be demand for them. So
Unbelievable.
you almost have to treat it as two completely different businesses, but the wholesale side of the barrels and everything, again, that's your safety net, but that's feeding the brand side, and you kind of got to work back and forth and just make sure. And that's again sort of a long-winded answer, I guess, to the barriers of, like, if you're not thinking through that, like, and you take some early missteps, like, it's a quick way to just completely shoot yourself in the foot, to be honest. And
What's an adequate number of barrel? I mean, what are we talking about quantity?
So I started with 500. You definitely don't need that much, but I was able to get those barrels because of the volume of them. I was able to get them for a little bit cheaper. So again, was able to get them below market value. And
what about life cycle too? So it's made at MGP. That's where you do your mash, your mix, everything.
Yep.
Once it touches barrel, how long is it in barrel on your first go here?
So our first go was the first production run was right at 5 years.
Okay.
And the second batch is about a little under 5.5 years or so. And then we'll probably do another 2 or 3 this year. So I'd like to try to keep it in that 5 to 6 year range.
Are these numbered?
Are you tasting?
Those aren't numbered. So
Sorry.
so we do basically each time we figured out, because the mash bill is the exact same for all of the barrels and they're all the same age.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, well, you're just going to pull random barrels and throw them in and dump them and bottle it, where you actually, just the difference in where a barrel is stored in a warehouse from, if it's really high, high tier, back in the back, it's hot and humid, that barrel is going to be completely different than one that's sitting, front and center next to the door that's getting a ton of airflow coming in and out. So, for us, we know that this batch of barrels that are way up here in this warehouse, we'll pull samples from them, and then we'll pull samples from the ones that are in different areas around different warehouses on the property, bring them together, and we have a girl who's our master blender, who had a background with Buffalo Trace and Four Roses, and really knows what she's doing, and she brings the samples into the lab and kind of does the whole thing, and has created this blend for us, of barrels. So. So it's all coming from the same place. It's all there, but it's all sort of, it's a little bit of chemistry and
the mad scientist in there.
Yeah, I'm like, what a crazy
Beakers
job.
going together.
Taste this all day long.
That's awesome.
I think it tastes wonderful. It's got, just a tiny bit of like caramel, if you will, just a touch on sweetness, but but not. What's that one? It's terrible. It's like Buttercup or Pickleball. It's the peanut butter one.
Oh, Screwball.
I mean, that's not even whiskey. I know, but like,
yeah, but
you
yeah,
know.
you talk about the life cycle of a barrel, for that matter, and once you use a barrel for bourbon, so bourbon has to be in a brand new oak barrel. Once that barrel is dumped, you cannot create another bourbon with that barrel. So you can create a whiskey, or you can do like a stout beer or something like that. You'll see. Or anything, to be honest.
I've seen red wine.
Yeah, you can see red
barrel
wine will
aged.
do it. Or you'll see a lot of people, like we send some of our barrels over to this woodworking shop in Indianapolis, and they build out cool tabletops and bar accessory things and stuff like that. But the flavored whiskeys and everything like that, a lot of that is basically them using a barrel that's already been used for most likely bourbon. They're putting it in there, they're aging it a little bit, they're pulling it out, and the juice basically that's going into the barrel is clear. So that's getting all the color from the wood and the char on the inside of the barrel. So a lot of times the flavored whiskeys, they're not in very long, so they're really, really light in color, or if not clear.
right.
So they're adding a bunch of food coloring, they're adding a bunch of flavoring, and that's why you see the honeys and the apples and the fireballs and the screwballs and all that stuff, because you can put a ton of different flavoring in there to basically make it taste like whatever you want. So it's that's a lot.
Just
more.
don't bother. Drink the real stuff.
Drink the real good stuff.
Come on.
Yeah.
So set the record straight too for our listeners, like bourbon whiskey. And
Yeah.
how do you be a bourbon whiskey?
Sure. So all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. So basically, if you think of whiskey, it's like this, parent company essentially, and you've got all these downspouts from Irish whiskey to Scotch to bourbon to flavored whiskey to Canadian whiskey, like you name it. And they all kind of have their own, requirements for what makes them, what they are. So bourbon, what I believe is like probably the most strict on all those requirements. So it has to be at least 51% corn. The other 49% can be more corn or rye or wheat or barley or whatever it is. And that's really that's it from the mash bill side. So a lot of the bourbons you see, they're all pretty similar. They they'll take their own blends and do stuff, but everything's kind of the same.
Right.
And then, it has to be at a brand new barrel. Like I said, it's got to be made in America. And then the rest of it is a lot to do with the distillation process and, the proof of the bottle itself. So you can't distill it to any more than 160 proof. So you take that, which is 80 or sorry, I didn't do the math. I guess.
Yeah, so it's half that.
Yeah,
right?
half that basically. So then.
So 80%.
Right.
So 160 proof would be 80%. Yeah,
correct. Mind blank there, but no more than that. So when you put it in the barrel, it can't be any more than 125 proof.
Oh.
So then it sits in the
But how do you change that?
watering it down once you're done.
Okay.
So once
got it.
and
Okay.
there's
So
even
you're
like
thinning it, so to
exactly,
speak. Got it.
exactly. So it goes in, and it may go down. You may put it in the barrel way less than that, but
So off hours is how much?
47 and a half, so
47 and a half.
95 proof. So ours coming out of the barrel, or actually, sorry, going into the barrel is 112 and a half proof. So, we had even gotten it down a little bit from there. So then when you put it in the bottle, it can't be any more than 125, and it has to be above 80 proof. So at 80 proof, it's pretty watered down. There's only a few of them out there, like Basil Hayden's at 80 proof, and they've done a good job. But for the most part, it's tough to have a sort of premium brand, at an 80
Yeah,
80
like the
proof.
last one I drank, it was so damn spicy. It was red breast.
Yeah,
I don't know what proof it was, but obviously it was on fire.
yeah, it's tough.
I mean, you had to cut it with a cube.
Yeah.
This drinks very nice, neat.
Thank you. Thank you.
You
Yeah.
do not
there's-
need a rock.
No,
in it.
you don't.
And I normally always have.
I mean, I will pour another one with a rock just to do a
To
proper
try it, yeah,
comparison.
exactly.
But
Exactly. So bourbon, it's it's a little bit different. Just as far as the requirements and sort of what you have to do to make sure that it stays a bourbon. And for the most part, a lot of your bourbons are always going to be more expensive than a flavored whiskey or just a standard whiskey. But it's all process, and then everybody always kind of says, look, you're made in Indiana, it can't be a bourbon, it has to be made in Kentucky, and it's like, well. yeah, 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky, but at the same time, like as long as it's made anywhere in the U.S., you can be a bourbon, and as long as you hit all the other requirements, and again, it just so
You
happens
can classify yourself as a bourbon, but you're a
Correct.
bourbon whiskey here.
right,
straight bourbon whiskey.
So straight basically is just a term to mean that it's been aged for at least 2 years. So which most bourbon is going to be aged at least 2 years, because if not, it's probably not going to taste very good. The other part of it is basically age statements on a label. So anything that's 4 years or older, you don't have to put an age statement on it. Anything that's less than that, you have to say aged 4 years, or aged 3 years or less than 3 years, or whatever it is. Which a lot of times, traditionalists are sort of like, well, anything that's aged below 4 years must not taste very good, and it can't be very expensive. But there's a lot of good bourbon out there that is a little bit younger.
You see 18 months. You see that a lot.
Yeah, it's
18 months on a bottle.
Yeah, and you never know. Like again, that wood that wherever it was sourced from may have been totally different. Sorry. It's totally different. And then the winter months and the summer months may have been crazy hot and humid and really cold, and you have like almost an accelerated aging process. And it's like you think about Scotch, like there's Scotches that are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old.
Right.
If you try to age a bourbon that long, it's going to taste like wood, and you're probably not going to have any liquid in the barrel because it's all going to be evaporated. At the same time, like Scotch is able to do that. Scotland is very mild year round. It's the temperature is not fluctuating very much, so it's able to stay in the barrel that much longer. You're not having that crazy evaporation, and it's not getting the extremes of flavor in and out of the wood that you're going to get most likely in the Midwest, which. Yeah, again, sort of allows it to
Fill her up there, Nick. That's
stay
a
in the
good
barrel
point,
that
because
much
I
longer.
tried once, this Pappy Van Winkle, and overrated price point, by the way, but I tasted a 20, and it was like cork and oak. Whereas, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously it was but to that point, it definitely had strong notes of oaky, the barrel and the cork.
Yeah.
Whereas I tasted the 15-year, and it was significantly milder without that, without taking on those notes.
Sure. And I'm glad you're being honest, because it's, a lot of times people equate the price point or the year to, if it's 20 years or 23 years, it's got to be better than, the 12-year, or, it's at this astronomical price point, and
Right.
it's got to
It
be
has
better
to be
than this,
better.
or it's got to be
Yeah.
better. And it's like, no, that doesn't have anything to do with that. Like there's a lot of everyday bourbons that are out there that are, fairly inexpensive that are, I would put up against, some of
Perfect
these.
example would be like the Bottled in Bond brand, where it's a prohibition requirement, right? And it's always going to be more expensive.
Sure.
But I'm not going to say rarely, but it's not a standard of it being better.
No, never. And that's what thing. It's like, again, it's all subjective. It's your own thoughts. Like most of the time, people are going to say, and a lot, and not to take away from a lot of people that do know what they're talking about, but the casual bourbon drinker honestly doesn't know a whole lot of difference between what makes what and why the taste is this way, and how the age does it. And it's like, and that's honestly what this brand was built for. Like, this is not to say like an introductory, bourbon, but like it's for someone who's a casual bourbon drinker who may be new to drinking bourbon, who it's not going to overpower you. You talked, it's got a little bit of sweetness. It's still got, a lot of taste notes of, kind of the allspice and the cinnamon and, a lot of the baking, spices.
Yeah, it really does. Though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And, it's something that's, hopefully, palatable.
Something that would taste really good. We're drinking it straight, but in a Manhattan, in an old fashioned, a very, classic, typical bourbon drink.
Sure.
That doesn't have a lot of ingredients. This would be very, very nice with that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so yeah, like I said, it's they're all kind of the same a little bit. Everybody's got their own take on, how the whole blending process and how they, differentiate themselves. But, at the end of the day, it's a lot about branding and marketing and sales.
So let's keep going that way. With Off Hours, you said earlier you wanted a brand that was going to be focused towards the millennial, you're going to break away from the norm and go into a different marketing campaign? How are you doing that? What's your strategy as a company that's going to change the world?
You're gonna be the first to say it.
One cocktail at a time.
Exactly. Yeah. If we don't, then everybody's gonna have at least a good time doing it. So, no, I think a lot of it, just the simplicity of, change your packaging up a little bit. If you walk into a grocery store, or liquor store, or look at the bar, at a restaurant, majority of the bottles that are there, they all kind of have the same look and appeal, where it's the same sort of tannish labels, the same sort of font, the same kind of long-winded backstory that's on either on the front or the back of it, and it, a lot of times it's all about some
the history or heritage.
It's a heritage thing. A lot of it is highly embellished. Apparently there was a crazy amount of, great-great-grandfathers who were doing this, years ago.
Well, all these stories were written while they were drunk.
Right, exactly.
Of course, drinking bourbon.
Look, there's a lot of brands that have done it really well, and the stories are true. And I don't want to step on toes about that or anything, but this was definitely more forward thinking of I appreciate what's been done, and and it wouldn't be the way it is without it. But at the same time, I felt like it needed a little bit of a fresh take. Yeah. And I think it started with the packaging of okay, what's looking at other industries, looking at what sort of the millennial demographic is drawn to. It was very minimal. It was very white and black. Keep it simple. I was like, all right, well, let's go that way. So, the label itself is if I can get someone to say, what is that? Okay, I've got step one. Then if I get them to pick it up and look at it, it's step two, and it doesn't have, a bunch of bells and whistles or backstories or anything on it. Okay, it's pretty simple. I can see the liquid, it's kind of, very minimal. And it's all right, well, that kind of, hopefully that speaks to me for the reasons of X, Y, and Z. And, hopefully you put it in your cart and, you go home and you like it. And if you like it, then hopefully you're going to buy it again. Again, price point was another thing. It was I don't want it to be, crazy expensive where you price yourself out of, the demographic. But you don't want to go so low that you're so in the thick of the competition with, the bigger brands that, you're just going to get lost in the weeds. So it was a little bit of a step up from, some of the brands.
And what is the price point?
So in the Midwest, we're selling it kind of every day at $42.99 or so. Some of the stores will have it down to $39.99. Out here it's a little bit more expensive. We're trying to keep it at that SRP of $45, $44.99. Some have it up to
very
$50.
Affordable for
it's
good bourbon like this. That's
agreed. I wanted something that if you bought it and you liked it, you felt like you were getting it for a steal. If you bought it and you didn't like it, you didn't feel so hurt that you just spent $50 on a bottle and you're like, oh, that thing's terrible, and and you're not sort of kicking yourself for it. But yeah, so packaging was a big thing. The name, another thing, and then the rest of it, which was sort of dictated by COVID, was our approach to the market. And
speaking of barriers to entry, it's how the hell do you get this on a shelf?
Right. And that's the most difficult part. Is a lot of times in California, there's a handful of states that do it a little bit differently, where they allow you as a brand to go directly to the retailer. For the most part, you can have your salespeople that'll go in and speak to the accounts, but you can't actually sell the bottle to them.
The distributor controls all that.
Correct.
Hand in your cookie jar.
110%. It is the 3-tier system that's been around since, the end of Prohibition. And, California, Florida, Texas, New York, I think Illinois, there's 5 states that basically allow you to go direct to retail. So I can walk into a store and sell that bottle to them, and basically the company that we use handles all the logistics and takes their per case fee basically. Whereas in all the other states, you have to go through a distributor. So I have to sell it to the distributor. The distributor then has to sell it to the retailer to the customer. So it's really difficult to get through all those layers to finally get to the customer at the end of the day and kind of see what they want, what they like.
And in those states, that applies to any alcoholic product, right?
Correct.
Beer, wine, everything, merchant.
Yeah, which is totally different. Everybody's talking about shipping alcohol, and it's really tough because each state has their own laws, and some are governed by some are, sort of mandated by the government. Others, it's kind of the Wild West a little bit in some of these things. And so shipping alcohol across, state lines is really difficult.
That's
and
such a shame because
Yes.
it really hampers entrepreneurial spirit.
Right, and you see the direct to consumer approach with every other industry, and it's crazy, and that's what everybody likes these days for the most part, is that convenience aspect of having it show up to your door within a few days. And to have to kind of go through this system is tough, and you never really have that kind of that idea at the end of the day of like what
does that cost you? Like, have you figured out what that costs you in terms of like margin or profitability to have to distribute through a merchant?
Yeah. For us in California to be able to go direct and sell, like I have so much more wiggle room to figure out, how much volume they're going to do, what we're going to do. Like when I sell it to the distributor, it is what it is, and it's a set point. Like I go from, probably 35 to 40% margins selling it to a distributor to 60, 70 and up margins. So it's crazy
Completely
different
business.
Completely different. And what at the end of the day, distributors are they're doing their job and they're getting the product out and they know the accounts and everything, but you still have to have your person going into accounts and being the face of the brand. If not, like there's every other brand out there is fighting for that same shelf space.
Shelf space, yeah.
So you have to be there. You have to do, promotions. You have to do different things to try to get customers to buy in. And, I think in California and these other states where you're able to go do that, because the margins are that much better, it allows you to bring in, do more promotions, do more incentives, do more things that, are going to be beneficial for the brand on the sales side, versus when you are selling to a distributor and your margins are already cut in half, basically, to go out and do that, and then on top of it, try to, promote the brand and everything. Like it makes it really tough to ever build a profitable business.
Right.
So that's why, you see a lot of alcohol brands, over the last few years that these crazy valuations or these crazy acquisitions, and I think, a lot of people see dollar signs in their eyes. Well, I'm going to get into the alcohol industry because you can do this. And if they did it, I can figure it out. And it's like, you can spend a lot of money really quickly and never have anything to show for it. And I think that's where the approach that we've sort of taken with off hours is, okay, we've got the barrels, COVID has kind of hindered things, for a little bit on the sales side. We've sort of pivoted around it a little bit. We've figured out a way to get some early traction and, get our name out there. And now that things are open up, we're going to take some of those traditional approaches to a certain extent. But then again, it's not like, let's not just go spend a bunch of money and try to, if it works, great. If it doesn't, then what do you do? And I think it's like a little bit of trial and error. Like, hey, if it's working, let's keep feeding it and let's go. And it's kind of like, you're kind of as grassroots, approach to it as possible, where, I'm not planning to go out and raise crazy amounts of money and, go that route. And basically it's an all or nothing deal where we're either going to, spend a fortune. And if there's an acquisition at the end, great. We're all high-fiving, but if not, then, then I just lost a bunch of people a bunch of money. Right. So it's like, so for this, it's kind of like, okay, this sort of this slow and steady approach, and let's see how it goes, and we'll continue to feed it. And, I would much rather build a successful business that, hopefully at the end of the day is profitable than, really take the approach to go out and just raise a bunch of money against it. And
now, how have you raised capital?
So I actually, I've been fortunate enough that I haven't raised any outside capital. I've had conversations with different, sort of CPG focused or alcohol focused venture groups. I've had conversations with the larger potential acquirers down the road who have VC arms that are saying, hey, we see what's going on with off hours. You're on our radar, which is.
But have you taken on any like private investors? Or
No,
just
I haven't.
Okay,
and that's kind of a point of sort of, I would say the next year is try to figure out, really where things stand at the end of the day, and how big is my appetite to keep funding it and scale it, and at some point it's gonna come to hey, do I want to continue to self fund this, or is it going to be go out and raise, or right now there's more and more banks that are funding against the barrels. So my inventory, has a dollar amount, and they'll say, look,
That's
we'll
an
give
asset value for
yeah,
sure.
We'll take 75-80% of that, and we'll give you to
A line of credit or what have you.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
it's another way of doing it where you're not
That was
potentially-
smart to go procure all those barrels that you didn't necessarily need out of the gate.
right.
But that gives you an asset on the balance sheet you can work with.
Yep.
Interesting.
But as a business owner or entrepreneur, that is the gamble. He's gonna put his neck on the line. He's gonna buy the barrels. We're gonna go have this
Yeah.
debt essentially
Yeah.
until I sell it. It's debt.
Right.
But what kind of appreciation have you seen in the market on the barrels you've purchased?
You're looking at
What do you think?
a new fill barrel from the time you buy it to 2 years later is close to double.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I
3-4
would
years
imagine
younger.
just so in
it
construction.
fluctuates too,
So
like
in
each year, so-
construction, year over year, the price of lumber has more than doubled.
Mm-hmm.
It's anywhere between 100 to 300% just for lumber. Is there any direct correlation? I mean, it's wood.
Sure.
Dumb question, maybe, but is there scarcity in barrels because of logistics due to COVID and all of that? I guess is my question, and that would have even further exacerbated.
Sure. Honestly, it's been a little surprising that there hasn't been, at least that I've seen. Luckily, as we talked about a little bit ago, a few years ago when there was sort of that misforecast of what things were going to be like years in advance, that ended up having a bigger impact on it. So now a lot of these guys are like,
Yeah, because the big boys were like, "Oh shit,
now we got to start producing.
we made a mistake here."
Yeah, and we got to figure this out really quickly. And if not, it's lost sales for them too. So luckily, I think that happened, and then everybody's like, "Well, there's going to be this huge bourbon, rush for the next foreseeable, few years at least." So they all kind of ramped up production, and as a small, craft brand, small startup brand, we are a little bit at the mercy of them, and thankfully they they knew what they were doing a few years ago.
So, like, go ahead.
Yeah, my question's more like, and this can tie to a lot of our listeners, client acquisition. So for you have two clients. You got to distribute your product. You got to get it in stores. You got to get it in restaurants. You got to get it wherever you can. And then you also end user. So are you...
Yeah, bars, restaurants.
Yeah.
Right?
So are you grinding? You're picking up, smiling and dialing and calling and trying to get it on shelves as much as you can?
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
It is very guerrilla marketing right now. It is.
How do you do that?
Yeah,
It's-
where's
what are you
the
doing?
time? You got a new baby. Where
Yeah, exactly. It's been a little crazy because there was sort of some ups and downs, over the last 6-8 months with COVID, where it was like, hey, we're open. We're open for outdoor dining, and then we're closed, and it's only takeout only, and we're doing to-go cocktails and that sort of thing. So our overall approach pre-COVID was, I didn't want to take this like shotgun blast approach, if you want to call it that, of like, I was less concerned about doing a crazy amount of volume out of the gates and just getting it into random places, but more focused on like, I wanted a brand foundation that was built on specific accounts of that target demographic that I know is going into this type of restaurant, this type of hotel, this type of liquor store.
Less is more.
Exactly.
Yep.
Very like inch wide, mile deep approach.
Yep.
And, because of COVID, there was a lot of restaurants, a lot of liquor stores that were like, absolutely no, we can't figure this out. Like, we are doing everything we can to, keep our head above water right now.
Keep the doors open.
Exactly. And I'm
Whatever
like,
we can
okay,
do.
and I agreed. I was like, I don't want to push or anything. But those that took us on, we really, truly tried to make it a partnership of like, we're going to do whatever we can to push foot traffic to you guys. Like, we want people coming in. In return, we hope that you guys are pushing, a menu or a cocktail on the menu, or, a cocktail on the to-go menu, or whatever we can. We're going to push social media. We're going to push digital ads. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that this feels like an equal, relationship. And, the same thing with liquor stores. Like, we want to drive people to you guys, and, whether it was from delivery to online to, just walk-ins. And those that were, those accounts that were in a position to basically take us on, like, really did help us out a ton because we weren't in a ton of them. And we were trying to do everything we could to basically, to to help
You
them
found
out.
some really good partners.
Yeah, and now that things are opening up a little bit, more and more restaurants are open to talking. More and more, people are starting to travel more, and the hotels are opening, and the liquor stores are still were killing it during COVID, probably even more than now.
Yeah, more than anything.
But they're there too, and so now. But before they were like, well, we don't really want any new brands because we don't even know what to do with our inventory from the old brands, and there wasn't really any light at the end of the tunnel of like, when is this going to open back up, and when can we start to have these conversations again? Which is thankfully has been here recently. So it was a lot of going in and doing what we're doing now is like tasting, sitting, talking about the brand, telling them why we're different, And I think that, the packaging, the taste of it
point.
itself, the price point, all kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And then, I don't have the traditional bourbon backstory that, everybody else is kind of had, or, and I shouldn't say everybody else, but, a lot of people.
It's
have
not
went
the
that
norm.
route. Yeah, it's not the norm. And I think that's intriguing to people of like, okay, it's normal. It's different. It's not something that is not a bunch of smoke and mirrors behind it of, why I'm doing this and how I'm doing it. And it's like, I'm going to be very transparent. I'm going to be very honest with, here's who we're sourcing it from. Here's who's bottling it for us. It's in LA, it's in California, it's in Kentucky. And, it is what it is, basically. Like, let it speak for itself.
It's a quality product.
Yeah. Like before I even before the bottle, the packaging was even done,
We're almost done with the bottle, guys.
I had a plastic bottle that I just gotten off of Amazon that was
Hooch.
yeah, basically, and they were
Walking
like,
around
"Is
with
that the
some hooch."
packaging?" And it was like a permanent marker on there, the Sharpie, and they were like, "Tell me that's not the packaging." I'm like, "What if it is?" Like, you never know. And they try it, and they're like, "Doesn't matter. Like, it's good." So we're gonna do it. And I was like, "All right, well, here's actually what it's going to look like." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it was nice to I honestly didn't want people to know what it was going to look like until they tried it. It was like, if you try it and you don't like it, then we don't need to talk anymore. Like, I want someone who's, likes it, it's like,
Absolutely.
I want it to be as, authentic as possible.
So
I'm not
for our
just-
listeners, if they want a bottle, where can they go?
Yeah. So right now, basically the Indiana, Kentucky is completely covered. So we've got pretty much the whole state, done there.
That's
California-
interesting. You would go into Kentucky.
Yeah, it's like walking into the
distribute.
Lion's Den,
It really
it's,
is.
It's tough.
Hey,
but again,
Brazen. Hey, old school guys, I got you.
Fantastic.
I talked to the guys there at some of the liquor stores, and I'm like, is this like a really bold move to go in and try to go into Kentucky with an Indiana bourbon and living in LA? And they're like, yeah, but you're going after a different demographic. You got different packaging, your price point's there, and kind of all the other things we talked about. It was like, I think you're going to do fine. So, luckily it's done really well. So Indiana, Kentucky is good. For California, we are basically in the kind of the LA metro area and expanding, really kind of expanding further south to start. So down through Orange County into, San Diego, really kind of treating Northern California as almost like an entirely different state. So, have plans to expand there, over the course of this year. But again, kind of taking that inch wide, mile deep approach, like I would rather, really hone in on, Southern California, Indiana, Kentucky, and kind of own our backyard per se, and then get into Northern California or, any other, markets, states before really trying to expand. Is, when you start to expand and you bring on more people and the whole thing, like I feel like there's just that much more opportunity.
What kind of, are you running lean as an organization now?
We are, yeah. There's I think 6 of us total. I just brought on a sales guy to help kind of boots on the ground, along with myself essentially for California or LA. Marketing. I've got a kind of an ops guy in Louisville. I got another sales girl that manages Indiana, Kentucky, and then social media and some kind of logistics aspects.
So you mentioned that Texas is a direct distributor too.
Yeah, they are they're a huge state. Like it's crazy. If you can get in there and you can do really well in Texas, then you put yourself on the map fairly quickly. It's just because there's so many large,
big states,
cities and everything. And in there,
it's boots on the ground.
Yeah,
and,
you're going to have a lot of people.
You'd have to be knocking on yourself. I mean, someone on your team would be knocking on doors and making them. Yeah,
and having a new baby and everything, that definitely that made it a little bit tougher.
So let's pivot to that. I always like this transition from professional to personal.
Mm-hmm.
So, is this your first child?
Second, so I've got a little boy who will be 4 in about a month. So he is a wild man, 110 miles an hour everywhere he goes. So he definitely keeps us on our toes.
And your newborn is?
A little girl, Ella. She, so she is 6 weeks old. Actually 6 weeks today. And so she is polar opposite. She, eats and sleeps and,
How many hours of sleep did you get last night? How are you managing that?
It kind of, it's a little, it varies, I think. Like, I usually get up, help my wife in the middle of the night and everything.
So what feeding shift are you getting?
I'm usually like the 2:33. She honestly really quickly
that's a
transitioned.
terrible one.
That's a terrible one. That was the one I was on.
But I like to
I
go to
had the
bed
10.
really early. I'd rather go
10 to
to
1.
bed really early and then wake up, or go to bed really early and wake up
I'm
early.
the same.
So my wife and my wife is like polar opposite. She'd rather stay up, and so it kind of works out. And honestly, our daughter, she sort of transitioned out of the multiple time feedings per night to like. We got her at 1. That's that 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3:30, and we're trying to push it. And the other night, literally, my wife was like going. She was getting up, and I woke up and I was wide awake. I couldn't, for whatever reason, I couldn't fall back asleep. And I was like, well, I guess maybe I'll go downstairs and get some of these thoughts off my head, and answer some emails and stuff. And
So how are you handling that? So you're a fit guy. You look very sleek and slender.
I drink bourbon, yeah.
You have a physical fitness background. You obviously stay in shape.
Yeah.
So there's that. You have personal interests. You've got your family. You've got a newborn. You're actually starting a business. So how do you manage your time? Are there any insights you can share with what you do to help keep sanity?
Sure.
And balance?
Besides, a glass of bourbon at least every night.
Well, that's a business
Yeah,
requirement.
exactly.
You're actually distributing
that's
product.
R&D.
Yeah, that's right.
We have to
Testing
figure-
product
Exactly.
tonight.
Yeah. Like
Gotta do it again, guys. Gotta test that product.
Sorry, honey, I'm working. I'm busy. No, honestly, I do most mornings. I get up, fairly early. So if I don't, our son comes like sprinting into our room, and it's like, you got to be on real quick. But I try to get up at least an hour or so early before everybody else wakes up. So it's a quiet house. And I'll just kind of think about what's going on for the day, what my schedule looks like, was there things that I missed the day before or whatever, like however I can schedule my day.
What time is that?
That's usually like 6, 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Our son's kind of, the time change is kind of throwing him off a little bit, but he's usually up by 6:45, 7 o'clock, and he's in preschool this year. So usually my wife's kind of on the baby, doing everything in the morning, and I'm with him, so getting him ready for school and eating out the door, and I'll drop him off. But usually, it's an hour or so, 45 minutes to an hour, where I'll kind of sit, collect my thoughts, kind of do my thing for the day, and then it's like, okay, from whenever he wakes up and getting him out the door and to preschool, I'll usually come home, and a lot of times I'll try to get some exercise in, or I'll try to, just depending on what the schedule is, like. That is honestly the only way like that I can kind of clear my head, is sort of to get half an hour really of some sort of exercise, which is all been from home and everything.
Next time you guys can do a podcast solely on drinking bourbon while talking physical fitness.
Exactly.
You see, as a-
they go hand in hand.
Kinesiology degree.
Yeah,
That was the
there you
same
go.
PT route. That was the same thing
like
I was
it.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we'll talk for days for that.
Yes.
But no, so that that's
So
a
you
big
squeeze
thing.
it in.
I squeeze it in, and a lot of times, like it is scheduling calls or scheduling meetings and stuff. And because there wasn't a whole lot of in-person stuff since we've launched, really, it's been more Zoom meetings and more calls and everything. That as we can do do as much as we can with what the market is allowing us to do, or what the state is allowing us to do, for that matter, of what's open. I try to schedule enough around each call or meeting where I will have a little bit of free time to either catch up on my emails, or if working from home, I'll go out and I'll take that 20-minute, half an hour break or so, and I'll spend it with my daughter, or I'll spend it with my son, and we'll go outside and toss baseball, or do something like just to try to have some time with them. And then I go back, and it's tough for kids, because it's like a lot of times they don't know whether or not when you're working from home, are you working, or can you come out and play? So it's sort of you're balancing that. And
they don't get it.
yeah, and it's like, it's tough, and it's like there's times because I always have like my ear pods in basically on the phone, and then he's like looking at me, my son, like, are you talking to someone, or
you're like,
what are
get
you
out
doing?
of here,
I'm like, hey,
get out of here, I
like,
want
hold
to
on,
call.
hold on. Yeah, and but it's like
Bethmo's calling me.
exactly.
Because the 4-year-old gets it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. So I'm like, I try to, schedule around so at least I'll get a little bit of free time here and there throughout the day. And,
Isn't it amazing how in the midst of all of this, like just the pure acceptance of people working from home and having all kinds of ridiculous chaos going on in the background is now like totally normal.
100%. And I
Kids,
think it's amazing.
dogs.
I think it is amazing because, pre-launching this brand and like doing the VC stuff and everything, being in an office every single day, and a lot of times you had these founders coming in that are, they're pitching you on their startup, and they're selling you their hopes and dreams of, why this is going to be, the greatest thing. Everybody's got their sort of like mentality of like, here, I'm separating myself from my home life, and this is who I am. This is business me. But now it's like you're home, and like the two are intertwined. Like,
Right.
business you and
100%.
personal you are the same person. And I think everybody's grown to realize that like it's not just some game face that you're walking into an office and you're, you got a suit and tie on, and that all of a sudden makes you totally different than who you are as a person when you're home. And it's like, I love the aspect of when you're on a Zoom meeting, you got a little boy or girl walking into the room, or you're like, hey, yelling at everything, and it's like it's great because you get an insight to what their personal life is and how how relatable it is to you as a person too. And it's like we're all doing it. We're all in the same boat together here, and I think it really does truly show you. I think if I was still doing the venture stuff, it would show you what type of person that that person is, and kind of what do they value versus like telling you what you want to hear.
Yeah,
staging
staging
exactly.
versus truly exposing kind of who they are.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of insight to that, and also just people being more genuine naturally, right?
Sure.
That's interesting. This is all good insight for Nick here, who has a beautiful child. Kylie's how old?
7.
7.
Okay.
And, they just agreed that they're going to pull the goalie,
Okay.
to try and have another child. And I think it's fantastic, The point is, this is great insight and expertise. This guy, Jake, is building a business in a pandemic, selling whiskey, and has 2 kids. Anybody can do it.
Anybody can
Yeah,
do
if
it.
I can do it,
If he has the
I'm
time,
sure, yeah,
we're good.
we're gonna figure it out.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We'll figure it out.
You will figure it out.
Yeah, honey, if you're listening, I'm coming home soon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the honey thing, I will say this too as a note to like bourbon and where it's trending and all of this. So my wife has quickly transitioned to being more of a bourbon gal.
Yeah.
That is a very wonderful signal for the fact that bourbon has a wonderful tale and a wonderful trajectory here as we head into the future. Because the fact that, your cocktail, prissy female women, I love you, honey, that was meant as a compliment,
Yeah.
are moving to bourbon drinks.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something to be said about that.
100%.
Without any, I'm being serious.
Yeah. No, and talking a little bit about kind of where we are with things and what the plans are, we also sell online. So we sell through a third-party company that kind of allows us to do all the logistics and everything of getting it to customers in states that we're not in, as far as we don't have a retail presence in. Over 70% of our customers are females.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I would have never
and a
thought
very-
that.
How do you know that?
They were able to, they pull all the data and knowing, what's going on. And it's unbelievable because for us, it's like, wow, we're hitting a demographic we weren't even like meaning to really. It was like, a lot of our social media and stuff, it does have a little bit more of kind of like, approach. It's a lot of guys and girls together, and it's a lot of mix and everything. It's like,
But it's Gen X and Gen X and millennials,
agreed,
right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
And it's getting away from kind of what it's not a bunch of older people sitting around smoking cigars, drinking bourbon. So it is it's basically
That's
without
fascinating.
targeting females, it's
I wonder
going
how
towards
that
target,
happens.
and which is amazing because if I came home with a bottle of bourbon and I said, hey honey, I bought another bourbon, she'd be like, great, that's good for you.
Right.
If she comes home with a bottle of bourbon, she says, honey, I got you a bottle of bourbon, I'm like, oh, it's amazing. Like, one, you were thinking of me and you got this, like something for whatever reason stood out on the shelf for you to buy that and bring it home. So I'm happy, you're happy for the fact that I'm happy.
Yeah,
you got a
100%.
gift for me.
Yeah.
And that may only, that
Happy wife is a happy life.
100, exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, whether that's for your husband or your, fiance, your boyfriend, your dad, your brother, whoever it is that like you want to come bring that over. And like, so if I'm able to really get the female customer bought in, I've already got the male, like that's already part of it. So if I've got her and she's the one that's doing a lot of the buying most of the time, so it's kind of like it's,
Yeah, that's
without
a
really
yeah.
targeting. Yeah, exactly. We haven't,
Because
without
I would bet you
targeting-
too, they're probably more loyal as a customer, brand loyal, than a male would be.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, and we were talking about some of the sort of Zoom kind of Bourbon 101 masterclass stuff we were doing, is a lot of times because everybody's doing it from their house. It's men that are on the list for the whatever their emails for the Zoom. But their wives are joining them, and they may not. They'll drink it neat and be like, oh, I don't know, and they'll drink it on the rocks and be like, oh, I could actually drink that on the rocks. But they're like, let's get to the cocktail, session, and it's like, you're making a whiskey sour, you're making something for them, and they're like, this is great, and it's like, okay, I've just converted, hopefully I've just converted to you both now as a customer versus. The husband going home and like, hey, honey, I sat through this, virtual happy hour, Bourbon 101, and she's like. Great, I don't know, but when they're interested in the product, because hopefully, like a lot of it has to do with branding and marketing too. So, it's been really.
How are
interesting.
those Master 101 bourbon classes going?
They're going really well. It's because the hardest part, I would say, is if you're an established brand, you're able to still kind of continue to get your your brand out there by
Right.
you have your signage and you have all your stuff, and it's more of like a reminder of like, oh, I saw this brand out there. Oh, that reminds me, I'm gonna go get that.
Yeah.
When you're a startup, especially now, if someone's never tried your brand before, like they're kind of like, I'm gonna go back to what I know is good. Like I've seen this, and they may have the marketing side down, but like I don't want to spend this money and potentially be not happy with what's going on with it.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's always been like, how do I get people to try the product? Like you have to get, basically they say liquid to lips. Like you have to get people to try the product, to see the product, which most of the time is in a bar. If no one's walking into a bar or can't sit there and see your bottle on the back bar that it stands out, then they're like, I don't know. So, and then you're relying on cocktail menus, which is difficult to get on because there's so many people that are trying to vouch for that space. So for us, the Zoom sort of masterclass type stuff has been a really good way to get people, and it may range from 8, 10 people to 150, 200 people on one of these things. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah,
guerrilla
so then it's
warfare.
the way that it's literally now it's changing because things are opening up. But before, it was the only way to get people to try the product in a setting that was really comfortable, and to learn about the brand,
That's a
without being able to
fantastic
do it.
idea.
So it logistically.
How long do
it's
those
sort of-
last? What's the time frame?
As long, like I've done them in a half an hour, 45 minutes, and it's like bang, 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 we go through it. But a lot of times, like the bigger ones, like the more people it is, it's less conversational. So it's me.
More intimate is a little better.
And more intimate is better because you're getting people asking questions, and it's sort of like we're doing right now. It's way easier to sort of like jump around and kind of talk about things and talk about off hours as a part of the bourbon industry versus me standing out there almost like lecturing.
We should do that for our advisors. Advisors
be
are
no
listening.
reason.
Danielle, we got to do that.
Yeah,
We gotta
we
set
like
that.
we've got the logistics and everything
That'd be
figured out. So
fantastic.
it's
And advisors who are listening, you're interested in looking at doing a client appreciation event, wake up, listen, do this, or something like that.
yeah, literally we did one the other day.
It's a
that
great
like,
idea.
Non-COVID in person
Right.
whiskey tasting
Exactly.
with a whiskey expert.
Bring your clients together, show them appreciation, and get them a little buzzed.
Exactly. Honestly, like a lot of the times, like these companies, because they're doing a lot of different things, everything's virtual. it's stuff that's really on sort of brand for their industry, and it's like, oh, you can only hear so much about this or hear so much about that. So then it's like, okay, well, let's do a bourbon tasting. Let's do something different. And it's like everybody kind of like lets their guard down a little bit. And it's funny because when you start, no one wants to ask questions. No one wants to do anything. But then you get you try it neat, then you try it on the rocks, and then usually by that time everybody's loosened up a little bit, and then it's like now you're getting people are chatting back and forth, and they're talking about what they've heard and how it goes, and then it's like, these things could be a half an hour, they could be 2 hours long. It's literally just kind of people have a good time, and
you fall into kind of like a mediator kind of role. I mean.
Yeah, so a lot of times, I'll start and basically say, here's what we're gonna do. Here's what the game plan is, and again, it's different for the intimate groups versus the bigger ones. But a lot of times, I don't want it to be about off hours solely. It's not a sales pitch to go out there and do this. It is, I want you to feel comfortable the next time that you order a drink or you make a drink at home, to basically understand why you're drinking it neat, or why you're drinking it on the rocks, or why you want to have it in a specific cocktail, and how those those different types of bourbon, those different brands, relate to why you may drink one brand, you want to drink it neat. You may drink a different brand, you're like, I can't do it neat. I got to do it in a cocktail, or I got to do something different. Yeah. So it's more of an educational of the next time something gets brought up, I want you to feel really intelligent and be like, I feel confident, and it's not because, my buddy just told me that I should be drinking this. It's because I know why I'm choosing to drink this, a certain way. And,
we want you to be an optimized whiskey drinker.
Bingo.
I will say drinking it neat was way more preferable than on a rock for me.
For you?
Oh, yeah. On a rock, it kind of watered down, lost some flavor. Neat was money.
Yeah, it definitely lost a little flavor with the ice. I would have preferred it a little cooler, neat.
Right. So I think you can get by, obviously we're drinking with bigger.
The stone maybe, a little bit of it, just the frozen stone.
Something to cool it down a little bit. And we didn't get a ton into the aspects of adding a little bit of water, which adding a couple drops of water isn't going to change the the temperature of it. But if you're drinking, a lot of times I'll put a small little ice cube, because to be honest, I'll drink it neat, but any bourbon, I'll
cooler.
We'll see. I like it a little bit cooler.
Me too.
But that little.
You don't add ice to your Chardonnay, do you?
Right. No.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Get out. Yeah. Exactly. I guess we're done here. No, but
just a smidge.
Yeah, but you add a little bit of water, and for me, I like it a little bit cooler. So when you do that, not to be a chemistry class here, but the guaiacol, this molecule in there rises to the surface. So that's what gives it a different, a really different smell, and a little you get all the bourbon taste without all the alcohol taste in it. And so a lot of times when it's neat like this, those molecules are kind of floating around in there. And you're going to get everything the same time. But as you're drinking it, they're always going to float to the surface, and you're always going to have basically
with just a little bit of ice that happens.
A little bit of
ice.
Why?
Because the molecules become more active?
Exactly. It's so that certain molecule rises to the top, and it changes the flavor and changes
we love getting nerdy.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're gonna do a taste test, you put it in there, you're gonna look at it, you're gonna see kind of what's going on with it and everything. You talk about the color, kind of as we did about the barrel and the this and the that. And
with whiskey, do you also look at legs like you would with wine?
Yeah, you swish it around, you do the whole thing, you look at the legs, you kind of see.
So more legs, slower legs, that means it's more sugar content, it's going to be a little bit sweeter.
Well, it'll be less sugar content, but you're going to see just almost a viscosity aspect to it, where if you got more water into it, then it's obviously gonna it's not gonna be the same.
Right, of course. No, we're just neat. If I pour it neat, what does it look like? How does it?
Yeah, it's gonna look. It's gonna vary. There's gonna be some variance in color from bourbon to bourbon. A lot of times too, these bourbons, they have to say on the bottle, but they'll finish it different. They'll finish in a port barrel or a sherry barrel or something different that's going to add a little bit of color to it. Because a lot of times when you dump a wine barrel, there's still going to be some leftover wine in there, which helps darken the color of the bourbon, which most of the time is beneficial, because you think the darker it is, the longer it's been aged, the better it's going to taste. But again, like we talked about earlier, it's not always the case. But you can kind of see it, and do your deal. When you smell it, the nose of it, always keep your mouth open a little bit. If you close your mouth and you give it a big, inhale, the alcohol, all you're going to get is the alcohol. So it's going to singe the inside of your nose, basically. Right. So if you keep your mouth or your lips pursed a little bit and you smell it, almost like you're just taking a breath in, but you're getting that nose, you're going to get more, you're going to get more of those notes and everything, the aroma of it.
Without the burn.
Yeah. And, again, it's all subjective. What I smell or what I taste might completely different than what you guys taste. And don't let anybody tell you that it's got to be a certain way, because it's not the case. Like, I'll say, and honestly, I think the hardest part is just whatever the characteristics are, like coming up with something like, what does that smell like, or what does that taste like? Yeah. And, and then like most of the time it's like, oh, well, it's, this, or it's that, or it's nutmeg. And you're like, nutmeg. Okay. Yeah, nutmeg.
Sure.
Sounds great. Yeah.
It sounds great.
So, it's crazy. Like, we have our own that, I've again, by no means am a whiskey connoisseur of like, oh, this is what I smell, taste, the whole 9 yards. But like, there's people that I do think that, kind of have a nose for it and, taste for it. And, I've just done it over and over and over again. Like, I know the difference, but what I'm tasting, but like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like this is.
99% of the population, they know what they like and they know what they don't like.
Right.
And this tastes really good.
Right. And that's the goal. Is like be a part of that percentage. Yeah, exactly. That you know what you like. And
so how do people purchase or?
Yeah. So if you're in California, we'll get it to you. Like, it's expanding retailer wise. It's we're actually adding a spot to our website where if you go on and put in your zip code, it's going to either connect you to your local retailer and they'll be able to deliver it to your door, I think within a couple hours. Or, you will be able to buy it online that way too, and it'll be shipped to you within the state within, a few days. If you're in Indiana, Kentucky, same thing. But you'll also be able to find it at all the local retailers there to walk into. And then if you are outside of those 3 states, if you go onto our website and you buy it on
that,
it
off hours?
Is drinkoffhours.com.
Drinkoffhours.com.
Yeah, so drinkoffhours.com. If you go on there, it's got all the bottles and merchandise and all that good stuff. But you will, if you put in your state there, it'll basically tell you. The only pain is that we can only actually ship to 30 states. There's another, the rest of them basically are all government controlled. So I don't know if this is good, but there's workarounds. We can find ways to get it to you if you're in a state that it says we can't ship to.
We'll get it to you.
Exactly. We'll get it to you.
Those 20 states are assholes.
Right. Honestly, those 20 states for the most part are like not huge consumption states and everything. You're kind of like, in the middle of nowhere anyways. But
and some states are like crazy tax on
it's
spirits.
Nuts. It's nuts.
Crazy tax.
They're like the day that they can figure out how to federally, regulate this and, make it across the board. This is the way it is and make everybody happy. And we can all do this direct to consumer and cut out the distributor. Like it's going to be,
wonderful.
Oh my God.
Game changer.
Total game changer. Like every single one of these guys, because it's all lobbying too. Everybody, it's like the distributors want this and they got to make sure they get paid, which like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could rely on them as being salespeople. Like they had relationships. You sold it to them. All right, my job's done. I sold it to you. Now you go out and you hit all your people. These days, it's like
they just deliver.
No, like I'm gonna push a cart, get your cases over there, and I'm gonna do it to 1,000 other brands that we've got. And it's like that is another thing that like
that's too bad.
Startup brands don't realize. It's like, oh, I got this distributor. I got Southern or R&D, like one of these massive distributors, one of the top few. Young's, Young's out here. It's like, I got in with them. It's like, that's great, but like you're going to get lost in the weeds real quick. Because there is zero incentive for them to sell your product.
Right.
Like their bills are getting paid by
the big dogs.
Exactly. And and that's why a lot of people raise a ton of money. Is that like I gotta pay? I gotta make sure.
I gotta pay to play.
Yeah, I gotta. Yeah, it's which is illegal.
As opposed to just creating a good product and letting consumers.
There are so many products out there that are probably way better than what's on the market that failed because
Unbelievable.
that they've never really had a
Capital.
chance.
They
It's
couldn't
capital.
play the
Yeah,
game.
They couldn't play the game, and that's, and I fortunate enough to be able to, do this for the, hopefully for the, for the foreseeable
Long run,
future.
yeah.
Yeah, for the long run and everything. But like, it's such a rude awakening for people that aren't necessarily as as sort of into the industry and as aware of what's going on, that it's like, I'm going to get in. I was a successful attorney or a successful doctor or whatever. I drink tequila or I drink bourbon. I'm going to go start my own brand. I'm going to do this. It's if they did it, I can do it. Like, you might as well just take that money, put it in a bag, and just burn it immediately. Like, it is a quick way to realize, like, oh man, like, this is an industry just like anything else. You got to know what you're doing. Like, you've got to have some sort of, I think, advantage. Like, you've got to have, it's very relationship driven.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have an advantage just like anybody else. If you're going to be a successful company, you got to be doing something different. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The two good things for you got VC,
Yeah,
experience, and two, you've done this before and had a company purchase, had a liquidation event so
Right.
you've done it.
Right.
Maybe on a smaller scale than what you foresee, but
Sure.
you've at least done it.
Those are a lot of takeaways. Like, that's where, the brand that we had before, like, there was a lot of, moving parts. There was a lot of things that I wasn't completely unaware of as far as, what it takes. Like, these guys, they had a sales and marketing, or I shouldn't say marketing, they had a sales background. So they knew the right people. They knew how to get it in. They knew how to sell it, or knew how to get it to the distributor to get it on the shelves. Getting it on the shelf is one thing. Getting someone to pull it off the shelf is a totally different story.
Right.
So that's the hard part of what we kind of ran into, is that you have to have your brand. You have to have your backstory. You have to have your price point. You have to have a lot of things put together. You have to check a lot of boxes to get a brand to be successful, so that I can, for me, as a brand owner, managing my P&L and looking at my balance sheet and everything to make sure that this is a company that's going to be sustainable to the customer pulling it off the shelf. And how do I market it to them? How do I get it to them? How do I make this a win-win for every stakeholder involved? And that's where it becomes really difficult, because if you don't know one step along the way, that's where it stops, and that's where you're going to spend a lot and you're going to try to figure it out, and whether if it's your branding, to have to rebrand, pull all that off the shelf, do everything, that's it's like mistake number one. Yep. So it's like, okay, get the brand right. Do I like the brand? Is that good? Okay, now we got to figure out how do I make sure that I keep the distributors happy? Well, they're happy when they put it on the shelf and people pull it off. It's like, okay, well, now I got to make sure that, one, I can incentivize them to put it on the shelf. Second, I got to figure out how I can get to the customer so that they see it enough that they're going to come out and pull it off, and they're going to buy it. So it's like, and it's just so many things, because there are so many people involved. For me, like, being out and about is a big thing. And really, like, for me, I'm like, I'm nobody. Like, I don't have any crazy backstory. I don't have a crazy thing. I'm like, but I'll tell you what my backstory is, and I'll tell you why this is good and everything. And like, I hope that, that you enjoy it, and you try it and enjoy it and you buy it, and hopefully, you're a lifelong customer. But it's an uphill battle. And I think that if you get into the industry and you don't necessarily know a lot of these things and have been there and kind of, realized it, it's a quick way to, it's a rude awakening.
What does distribution volume look like for your business and also peers?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. Like, for us, again, like, I'm taking that sort of the stepping stones for the first,
100%,
couple of years of
absolutely.
like, I'd rather like distribute to a smaller area, like
Less is
really
more.
concentrate on that area, like
Yep.
have everybody know about it, and then continue to expand. Like,
Yeah.
there's brands out there that'll go and they'll open up, 10, 15, 20 states. They want to be a national brand, which is, it's just a different strategy.
Yeah.
To do that, though, like, to be relevant in every single one of those states, so you have to have the people in every single one of those states to
Right.
be able to go into those accounts, to continue to do it. And it just, the numbers, you just keep adding more zeros basically
Right.
to the end of the,
Right.
past those commas. And that's where, like, the head count and the financial aspect, like, it just becomes that much more weight on your shoulders,
Yeah.
that much more, opportunity to mess it up, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, and that's my,
It's interesting
take
because
is
around
like-
here we have fantastic microbreweries
Tons.
or born every month in Southern California, and they're started out of a warehouse, and they become a $100 million business, billion-dollar business in time. I mean, that's obviously,
Sure. And honestly, I take the bourbon industry is almost like the craft bourbon industry.
Right.
A lot of these craft distilleries is just a few years behind the craft breweries.
yes,
The
absolutely.
breweries learn to be the local go-to.
Right.
And you expand your distribution and you figure out, ways to get out into these other sort of like-minded markets.
And make no
expand.
mistake of it, many of the craft beers that we consume, they're better by far than any of the mass-produced beers that we have access to. No
100%.
question. Why wouldn't spirits be any different?
They have
And you're building that.
They have more
Yeah.
money
That's
to
fantastic.
throw at us. That's
It's
all it
difficult.
is.
It is very much like once you're there and you're distributed by the big guys and you are owned by, one of these bigger groups, they are dictating what's going on. So
Yeah.
like it is very difficult to be a smaller brand and get through that sort of, that competition, that rat race essentially to get eyes on you to another level. So like, craft breweries, like when you have a ton of craft breweries, like if you're the one in that area that's really just killing it, like you've got everybody knowing that who you are. As soon as you step foot out of that area and you go to a different area, there's probably a different craft brewery that somebody else has got.
You're not the guy anymore.
No, you're not it. And it's like, well, how do you expand beyond your
Right.
local market? And I think that's where, for me, I take the approach of like, I would rather be in fewer markets, open up those markets and be the go-to brand, hopefully in those markets, so that if down the road, if sometime, for whatever reason, if I decided I wanted to sell this to, a larger, acquirer that's going to plug me into national distribution, there's that much more upside from it. Like they know each one of those markets, they know how it works, and they're like, well, this worked in this market for you, and they're able to take that and run with it. Versus like if I went out to a national audience and I've got to figure out what works in Northwest versus Southern California or California on the West Coast to the East Coast to the South to the Midwest, you name it. Like those are all different customers.
Right.
And you got to figure out how to relate to every single one of those customers. Like that gets really expensive.
Challenging.
And if someone is to acquire you at some point, what's left to do? So
Yeah.
I think like, if they're saying, hey, we're going to do this, like one, it is a way to, your company is massive to be able to do that, which I think is just more room for error.
Right.
But if, there's not much left, I think, of an upside for, a potential acquirer to take you and then plug you into their distribution if you're already in their distribution.
Yeah. If you've already gotten to the end of the
it's kinda
runway,
like,
what's left?
right. So it's just there. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about it, and I think that's where, who knows? At the end of the day, we might all end up at the same, at the same thing, anyways. But like for me, it's my comfort of here's the way I'm going to do it. With the barrels, with the brand, and it fits me. It fits my lifestyle. It fits
And
more
hopefully
than-
many others.
exactly. And then versus the alternative, which might be just as successful, but just a different way of getting there.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in here.
Thank
Sharing
you.
your bourbon, your story, everything else.
Yeah. No, I
So,
appreciate it.
One more time. How do we,
Shameless
what's
plug.
the website? The website,
Okay.
right?
Exactly. No, so website is drinkoffhours.com. If you go on there, we have a tab that'll tell you all the stock is, so it'll tell you where we're carried at in every liquor store, every restaurant for that matter. And then, for California, Indiana, and Kentucky. And then also on the website, you'll see, a shop tab that will tell you, basically give you the option to buy it on there, which will either lead you to buying, online if you're not in California, Indiana, Kentucky, and having it shipped to you, which usually takes, a couple weeks in some, instances, to having it delivered within a couple of hours if you're in California, Indiana, or Kentucky.
Nice. Buy it up, people. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be a customer.
Absolutely. I wonder if I place an order now, it'll be delivered by the time I get home.
Let's
That would
hope
be
so.
great.
That's the goal.
Thank you, Jake, for
Thank
coming
you.
in.
Thank
This
you.
was great.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks.
the time.